Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Wheeler Centre and to the Fifth Estate. I'm Sally Warhaft, and it is my great pleasure tonight to be hosting this event on the American election. And I think we couldn't have three more interesting people to be talking about where it's at just a week before Americans will, hopefully all of them will be able to go and vote, or at least all of them that want to. With us tonight we have George Negus, who has worked on, I think, every free-to-air television network in Australian history. I'm sure you all recognise him from Foreign Correspondent and Dateline and 60 Minutes and The Today Show, and many of you will have read his best-selling books, including The World from Islam and The World from Down Under and The World from Italy.
Italy.
Where's the next world?
The world from my phone. I've decided to try and explain that to myself, let alone the rest of the world.
Also with us is Eleanor Hall, and Eleanor, of course, is the host of ABC's The World Today, which I listen to religiously, and it is so great to actually meet Eleanor this evening. She was a former Washington correspondent during Bill Clinton's impeachment, and she worked in the Canberra Press Gallery as well as many other ABC duties, including Late Line and 7:30 Report. She also worked and studied in the US on a Harkness Fellowship and did her Masters of Journalism there at the Columbia University in New York, and she's recently got back from the United States where she was covering the first presidential debate. And also with us tonight is Don Watson, speechwriter, author, and one of Australia's very few true essayists. His books include Recollections of a Bleeding Heart, Death Sentence, and most recently the very beautiful American Journeys. So please welcome our three guests. This time 4 years ago, everything was breaking Obama's way a week out from the election. I want to start by just asking each of you how you think this campaign is tracking and what you kind of make of it a week out. And George, perhaps we'll start with you.
Well, I had a bit of an idea what was going on 4 years ago because I was there. I was there before it happened and thereafter it happened. It was a pretty remarkable experience. I remember that the day after the election, the whole country felt like it had a hangover after Obama was elected. People were stopping you in the hotel foyer saying, "Happy Obama Day," and stuff like that. And you thought, hello, they're going to wake up to the fact they've just elected their first black African American as president, and they're not going to feel so happy about it later. There was a backlash straight away. I can remember he said publicly not long after he was elected, he had to keep reminding people that he was black before he became president. So now I really don't know. I don't understand what the hell's going on in America. It's not something that I'm intimately associated with journalistically, but very, very keen to stay abreast of personally. I think something very strange is going on there at the moment, in that they have the black American president that they thought they wanted to have and then had doubts about it, who was elected faced with two at least, or three of the most calamitous and most difficult political conundrums any leader of any country, let alone the United States of America, has been faced with: the GFC, global warming, and a handful of wars in the Middle East. But people behaved after he was elected as though those things hadn't even happened. And then you've got this other guy as the alternate president of the United States of America who was doing strange things to the American economy before the GFC. So I'm not too sure what they're on about. I mean, we know the Americans as an electorate are pretty odd. I mean, was it Henry Ford that said you'll never go broke underestimating the intelligence of the American consumer? I think you'll never lose an election underestimating the intelligence of an American voter.
I'm not sure if we can really say that here, George, but...
you could say that here.
You reckon it's that much
definitely
worse?
Say that here.
Very interesting. Eleanor, what do you think?
I think it's a very interesting point that George makes about race, because one of the things I think 4 years ago, I think a lot of people inside the United States and outside, felt this sense of pride, felt this sense of whether they'd voted for him or not. America had come past, you know, the troubles of the slavery years, the Civil War, the civil rights, all, you know, okay, we got past the race thing. We've elected our first black president. And I had a very interesting conversation with someone not long ago who's quite a prominent pollster, and I've actually just forgotten his title, but it's some, you know, bigwig thing to do with the American Election Project. And he said a very interesting thing about race, because while we assumed that the 2008 election was the Americans voting for a black president, he said when he analysed the numbers, he said, I could not avoid the conclusion that in fact Obama being black had pulled the vote back about 3%. And so if you look at it like that, so then the question becomes, OK, so what does that mean in the current context? When Obama's lost his gloss, he's lost that wonderful social network of young supporters who believed, you know, the hope and the change and the outside the beltway, I'm going to change the way things work. And then Obama said some ridiculous line recently. I mean, everyone makes ridiculous mistakes in political lines in politics, and of course they get amplified by wonderful people like us in the media. But that line about, oh, I can't change it from the inside, which, you know, the disappointment sort of rolls on. You pit that in with the economy, as George was mentioning. I mean, I think one of the interesting questions of this race, there have been sort of different phases of it. There was a period where the big question was, how could a Republican not win against a Democrat presiding over an unemployment level above 8%? It hasn't happened since the Great Depression. So, and then, of course, you have Mitt Romney, who looks like, you know, the wooden character out of that television show. I've forgotten the name of the show as well, forgive me. But then the debates happened and Romney suddenly turned it all around and we're now dead heating. But I think the interesting question about race, this pollster said to me, what happens is when you ask people directly, they don't say, of course they don't say, I would never vote a black American president in, but you ask them different questions about something almost quite unrelated, welfare benefits, whatever. And he said there is a solid group of Americans who, A, didn't vote Obama in and would never celebrate having a black president, and B, are determined to get him out of there. And then you say, OK, but hang on, how embarrassing is it for those that wanted him in there to throw out the first black American president after one term? And he said, well, that's a pretty hard thing to get people to go to the polls on, but you know, maybe that's one of the ways that Obama somehow brings back the support, because I don't think either of these candidates are really galvanising a great degree of enthusiasm. And that's one of the things that puts this election at a very interesting point for those of us that watch it and love the political game of it as well. So,
Was it the Thunderbirds? Is that what?
That's the one.
Don.
Well, I was in Zanesville, Ohio for the election last time, and that's a town, used to have a population of about 60,000, now has a population of about 25,000. It's sort of Rust Belt. It's divided by a river which, since its foundation, separated the sort of redneck Okies from West Virginia, which is one way it was settled, and the sort of liberal anti-slavery Presbyterians on the other side of the river, and it still divides that way with less of a religious flavour. And when Obama was elected, I went back 6 months later and they said 24 hours after Obama was elected, you couldn't buy a round of ammunition anywhere in Zanesville. There was simply not a firearm to be sold. They'd cleared the shelves. There's absolutely no, I don't know about underestimating the intelligence, but there's nothing begins to describe the way American exceptionalism becomes American stupidity in the wrong hands. And probably they should drop it, you know, that would be a great thing, because American exceptionalism is American solipsism, American ignorance, American denialism. You know, they don't... it's profound, the ignorance. I saw John McCain speak there and tell... It was the most alarming political moment of my life. John McCain with a full gymnasium, shrieking with his hands, you know, this high, trying to lift them above his head from, for God's sake, war wounds. It was sort of positively Roman. And he saying, Obama wants to spread the wealth. And the auditorium, of which at least 80% were on generational welfare, most of them in army fatigues, were shrieking, boo, 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 you know, spread the wealth, how dare they? A poll later showed that more than 50% of Americans on welfare don't know they're on welfare. They don't recognise it as government welfare. They think they're earning an honest living. But the fact that their kids, like about half of the population of Ohio, certainly of Columbus, get free breakfasts, free lunches at school because they qualify, because they're so poor, makes no difference. So Obama tells the biggest lie of all when he says there are no red states and no blue states. There's only the United States of America. I mean, that's the grand narrative, and it's total rubbish. You know, it's worse than that. There are not only red states and blue states, but within blue states there are divides which are phenomenal.
And Zanesville really is split by the river.
It's physically split that way.
I looked up Zanesville today because I know you were there 4 years ago, and it's doing slightly better after 4 years of this. Unemployment level has dropped a little bit, and of course the Democrats they're there like they were there last time. It's a bit of a, you know, where goes Zanesville, there goes the US election, and but even with these changes, you've got Republican sort of mayor or local government saying this is all about us and so on. Paul Ryan was there last week. You said last time that, you know, of Obama and McCain 4 years ago, one was in the prime of his life, the other was on the way to assisted living.
Did I?
Well, if you didn't, you should.
He really did. What do you think of Mitt Romney?
Well, he's very white, isn't he? And his wife is even whiter. And you can't tell me that wasn't the whitest and most deliberately white Republican convention of all time than that one. You could not see a black face in the House. And they all had...
Are we allowed to say that he's a Mormon?
Well, he's that as well, yes.
But are we allowed to say it?
No, you're allowed to say it.
I thought there must have been a piece of smart legislation in the middle of the night at Washington where they said, no, you cannot call the Republican candidate a Mormon. It's some sort of discrimination. It's almost as bad as being black.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they don't mention the fact that where religion, in its most crudest, fundamentalist form, is such a powerful force in American politics, they're not bothering to even differentiate between the fact that he is not really a genuine evangelical Christian. I mean, he'd have big trouble getting membership of the Tea Party. I mean, Mormonism is a cult. And until 1974, as I understand it, African Americans were regarded officially within the Mormon Church as subhuman. And they stopped being polygamists? Most of them probably have, because they can't afford to be other than married to one person. But all these things about this man, which are so... It's carrying... It's sort of political correctness gone a little bit crazy, that you can't say the guy belongs to a religious cult where a bloke called John Smith thinks he's daily in contact with God. And it's a bit wacky, even in American. Religion and politics get very, very intertwined.
And it's also regarded as class warfare if you point out that his father, who was a state governor and president of American Motors, earned 40 times the average, the typical American wage, whereas Mitt, who's also president of Bain Capital and a state governor, earns 400 times the average American wage.
I think the Democrats have done a bit of that, haven't they?
Oh, I think they're hammering away at it, but it will be described by the 1%, you know, as sort of class warfare.
Joking in the back there, and I remember the people said when Berlusconi got elected in Italy, the Italians are not as silly as they look, you know, to have a crooked scrillionaire, with a very sort of... we won't go into his sex life, but a crooked millionaire is not a bad thing to have as your leader, and that's the way the Italians think. I lived there. Yeah, we might, instead of having the mafia unofficially, let's have the mafia officially and have Berlusconi run the country. Yeah, and I think there might be a bit of that. A bit of the Italians might have rubbed off on the Americans. They're saying, well, the world's really stuffed. We might as well have a bloke who's stuffed up a few economies before himself and sent a few people bankrupt and sacked a few 100,000 people and made a few bucks and at the same time himself. He's the sort of bloke we need in the current economic climate. I'm jesting, but I'm not.
No.
Yeah, because he was, as I said, doing very strange things, he and Bain and Co. and the private equity people, that he was very much a part, he probably invented it. I mean, there's a very good article I could recommend to you. I think in the current edition, if not the last edition of Rolling Stone magazine. I know it's a very august political journal, but they get in your face, I know, but sometimes they get to the point, about Romney and Bain and Co. You read it and you say, I found myself saying, look, the superlatives notwithstanding, and the, they couldn't possibly seriously consider this bloke as an appropriate person to lead what was once the most powerful nation on earth, militarily and economically.
Up until a few weeks ago, it looked unlikely that Mitt Romney could pull close, and then everything seemed to change with the first debate. Eleanor, you were there in America. Tell us where you were and what your take of this was, because it really seemed to turn things around.
I think it really did turn things around. I actually wasn't in the debate city. I wasn't in Denver. I was in Stanford. I was a media fellow at the Hoover Institution. But it was fantastic because everyone there was talking politics. It was a really exciting week. And it's really interesting just to sort of cast your mind back to that time. I mean, I think all the things you have both been saying about Romney ended up being way in his favour in that debate because, as one analyst said when I asked him later how important are the debates in this campaign, he said, yeah, well, they weren't meant to be important, but Obama made them important. You know, up until that first debate, I think no candidate has gone on to win from a losing position that close, you know, at the end of September, being that far behind in the polls, except for why do I keep forgetting people's names at critical points? But you know the one they did the newspaper headline, Truman. Except for Truman,
we knew you'd get that.
You wouldn't think I actually, you know, reel off people's names for a job, would you? So Truman and, of course, in 2000, George Bush. So there was this sort of sense of despair in the Republican Party. In fact, Peggy Noonan, who was Reagan's speechwriter and is quite a prominent Republican analyst, said when she said that Romney's campaign was disorganised, she was actually being polite. She said it was a rolling calamity. You know, and the 47% comment had come out, and unemployment, I believe, had actually just come down. So, you know, it was like, oh, the guy's just got no hope. So the bar is set so low, all he really has to do is go in there and look like he's an equal with Obama. Obama made that incredibly easy because he put in a very petulant debate performance. And I think, I mean, the comparison that was made to me while I was there and I was speaking to, you know, people that had run Republican campaigns, a really interesting guy that ran George Bush Sr.'s campaign and said, you know, the slightest detail can make a difference. That Clinton used to colour his hair slightly grey for the foreign policy debate and then back down to brown again for the domestic policy debate. You know, that and he said I come out in a cold sweat every time I think about those town hall style debates. He said because he remembered when somebody in the audience was asking some long and involved question and George Bush was thinking, I just don't know what he's talking about, and he looked at his watch, which is so insulting. Whereas of course he was up against the charming Clinton, who was walking up and practically hugging people. So you know the debates they're quite a it's quite a difficult moment for a candidate because you can really come a cropper in them. So the tendency is to play it safe, as Obama did. And I think Romney pretty much played it safe in that first debate too. But the debate comparison that was made to me after the debate was Reagan, when if you cast your mind back, those of us that are old enough, I think I was still at school, but anyway.
I wasn't. I can remember. I covered the Reagan campaign, so don't be rude about it.
No, but I actually do remember being at school. And I remember thinking, they can't elect a movie star. Oh. But actually, the really interesting thing was it wasn't that he was a movie star that was the thing. It was that he was scary. So when Reagan came on and he wasn't scary and he smiled and he was friendly in his charming movie star way, that was what apparently won people over in the first debate, whereas Romney everyone had thought he was wooden and hopeless and the Thunderbird person that I was just, pointing out earlier. And he came out and he did what Obama normally does, and he started talking about stories and people he'd spoken to, and he sounded, and do you remember at the convention, even his wife was talking about, I have to humanise him for you. It was like, oh no, what a terrible thing to say about, that it's got to this level that this man isn't even regarded as human. So pretty much all he had to do was come out and sound like a warm human being, and
but don't
he
we
did.
think that he did all right in the second and won in the third? I mean, we don't We're
No,
not
but
taking...
you mean, do we think Obama did all right in the second and the third? Yeah, absolutely. But you see, once you'd opened the gate... And once people had got rid of that idea that, we just cannot elect that guy, then all the things that are against Obama come into the fore, particularly the economy. Because everyone had said too, before this first debate, if only Mitt Romney has the chance to argue that he is the better economic manager, that Obama's had his chance and he hasn't made it work. Now, you can argue both sides, but... The point that the Republicans were making was he's actually got a good story to tell. It's just that he got ambushed by his own side, of course, during the primaries when the whole Bain Capital thing was pointed out, how he'd actually cost jobs. But, in fact, the guy's a businessman. He knows how to create jobs, and that message wasn't getting out there. He finally got some clear air to put it out there, and it was pretty much of Obama's making.
Can you go back to your point about the movie star thing? I mean, and you mentioned Reagan. Thank you very much for reminding me how old I am. But, Robert Stack was the guy who played the lead in the television series The Untouchables, wasn't he? He was a great mate of Reagan's.
So I remember him too.
Yeah, you remember him. Good on you, Don. That makes me feel better. But he actually, I saw him interviewed on American television during that Reagan campaign. And you're dead right. I mean, Reagan's speech was like somebody had just torn pages out of the Reader's Digest and shuffled them up and put them together, and he got up there and read them, But it was... He was... Really, I actually met the guy, and it was quite disappointing. Really, he was as silly as he appeared to be. But Robert Stack was asked about his mate Ronnie Reagan. They were pals because Reagan, was a movie star and played baseball heroes and all that sort of stuff, and was very instrumental in the anti-communist carry-on, the McCarthyist period. But he said, "What do you think about Ronnie Reagan and his chances of becoming president?" And Stack said, "Well," he said, "all Americans grow up wanting to be a cowboy or a movie star or the president. And in Ronnie Reagan, they got all three. He's a perfect candidate." I mean, where do you go from there?
Don, I've thought so far the speech highlight or the high point of this whole election campaign was Bill Clinton at the Democrat convention. What do you think has... I mean, perhaps you've heard something better that I've missed. What do you think's gone on in their sort of speech making and communication in this election?
I think the problem is for the Americans is that the election has been really content free, except we're not seeing the advertising which is hammering away at... it must be miserable to be one of the 350,000 people who are going to decide this election, because they'll be just being chased 24 hours a day and their votes will be being begged at the door. But the speeches the Americans revert now so quickly to the grand narrative, and Reagan's become part of it. Reagan's almost up there with Lincoln for half the population, which is just bizarre. The man is... I'm glad you found him as silly as you seem, because
single-handedly. I want you to remember that.
He's seen as having single-handedly defeated communism, but he is the man who spawned the neocons. He actually unleashed the low tax. He's the reason why the American middle classes are starving and they can't get any decent recovery going, because he completely reconstrued the whole taxation system, and it's just got worse under W. But the speeches, they are very odd. There's something grand about American rhetoric, but a good speech actually has content. It really does need some content to hold up. It's like old D.H. Carr said about history, it's like a potato sack. It won't stand up unless there are potatoes in it. And increasingly American speeches are really just on this grand narrative, to which half the American population is deeply susceptible. They want to hear this over and over and over again. So if you keep saying, America's the greatest country on earth, you can conveniently ignore a whole stack of social disasters. The hollowing out of America is completely ignored, including by those who are the hollowed out, the people who are doing it really badly. The Tea Party is. I went to the first Tea Party in Ohio on Independence Day 2009, and really it was a very sorry lot. And if anybody had told you this sort of cross-section of people across the country would take hold of the Republican Party, you could not have believed it. These were poor buggers. often with guns stuffed down their tracksuit pants. Saying insane things. People just with just a sort of generalised grievance about authority. It wouldn't have known a tea party from a tea bag. I mean, would not have had... Well, it wouldn't know what the tea party
How would you rate them on the sort of scale of the people who are outside Parliament House doing the Julia Lai thing? How would you rate them? Are they better or worse, depending upon your point of view?
I think sadder.
Sadder?
Yeah, really awful.
That was pretty hair-raising stuff down there.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think we'll sort of perhaps imitate a little bit of it, but basically there's something works a bit better here. But I mean, I think people underestimate how hollow American society is in the middle. You know, it's an amazing place, and you can easily make the mistake of thinking the place is buggered. It's probably not. But there is, educationally, nutritionally, in all sorts of ways, America is way, way down the list.
Are there things about its election time and its politics that you like?
Oh, I think it's fantastic. I wish to God I was there again. No, I could travel around America the rest of my life. Like, you know, Donald Crowhurst in the Atlantic. I think I just go round and round and round and round. I don't know why. It's just that there is something about the place which is fabulous, including, you know, high intelligence and an amazing view of the world that you don't
It's a paradox. It's a paradox from beginning to end, because the best of it is the best of it and the worst of it is unbelievable.
Yes, I was about to sort of find myself jumping in to defend the Americans there for a while, Don, until you said that, and I thought, yes, that is the story of Americans. They've got the best and they've got the worst. And I think one of the... we were talking earlier about what's happened since the last election. I think one of the sort of underlying stories too is what the Tea Party has done to the Republican Party and what that's ended up doing to the candidate. Because, you know, there was a story after Obama's win that the real victims of this were... The generally intelligent Republicans. They were knocked off, and they have been progressively knocked off. You know, you look at the last elections, and the Tea Party people like Paul Ryan rule the joint. And I asked someone recently who worked in the Clinton administration, in fact it was just on the weekend, and I was sort of saying, okay, so now if Mitt Romney actually does win, does that mean we get Mitt Romney governor of Massachusetts? Or does that mean we get this guy that's sort of changed his mind and, you know, are we going to have, you know, sort of Netanyahu running foreign policy and the Tea Party running the economy?
Or John Bolton running foreign policy.
Well, that'd be just as scary. And unfortunately, he said, we're not going to get the Massachusetts governor. And one of the reasons, apart from the Tea Party, was money. We're going to get the guys that paid him, including... you know, all the people that have put the money into the super PACs that run the casinos that are, you know, extraordinarily anti-Iran, and, you know, it really could be quite a dangerous place. Because I was thinking, oh, look, at least Romney, if you go, okay, he might have changed his mind a lot, but at least if you go back to when he was a governor, he was capable of governing, you know, he could pick good people, maybe it won't be so bad.
Binders full of women.
Yeah.
What did that mean? Binders, the binders full of women.
George, yeah. Well, what he was trying to say, obviously, was that he could get binders full of women.
Right. Oh,
well,
let's clear that up.
At his disposal, out of plastic slips.
Yeah. See, the foreign policy is interesting. That's the one that Obama apparently won. I mean, I was going to ask Don actually before, as a speechwriter, etc., for these blokes. Yeah, yes, we can was, of course, the slogan that took off, and Obama took off with it. Should it have been, since then, we thought we could? Or
should the Republicans have said, no, you didn't?
Well, at some point he should have said, hang on a minute, I did go a bit far back then, and no, we can't, but we're going to give it a good crack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I suppose you don't, when you come up, it's a better slogan than moving forward. But
gee, that's a compliment.
But you know, I guess you don't think, well, we're going to lose the 2010 congressional elections and we're going to have a Congress that won't move an inch for us. And I wouldn't be too worried about the slogan. I think but it sort of illustrates the problem that nowhere in the 2008 election was Obama able to really say, we're going to face horrendous problems. I mean, he inherited... It was worse than what Roosevelt got. You know, Roosevelt got a depression. This guy got a depression, plus 2 wars, plus hell, you know, God knows what, and he was black.
Yeah, but it's also not smart in America to say, you know, we're stuffed.
No, you daren't
He's
say
already
that.
gone to the other extreme and said, we're back. Oh, yeah.
There was also always going to be a problem, Dom, with Obama having to find out where he placed himself after, you know, Yes We Can, and the great movement that sort of put him into office. He was never going to be able to do that a second time with the disadvantages that also come with incumbency. Has he sort of misplaced where he's tried to land this time round? Should he have done a little bit more one way or the other?
Well, I don't know. I always thought that maybe they had a sort of a grand triangulation strategy, that he thought, well, I'll always keep the progressives, and those I lose are in states that don't matter to me anyway. I'm going to win in California and New York and places like that. But out in Ohio and Colorado and Virginia, I've got to get them back again. So he thought, I'm going to offend every progressive American in the country rather than lose those characters who are now deciding what the result will be. And they're the hardest to persuade that context matters, because they're asking the question, am I better off than 4 years ago? They're asking the really back pocket questions about
the famous Reagan question.
Yeah, well, that was always going to be the problem for him.
You know, the politics is going to get a little bit strange when people now in America are comparing, not contrasting, comparing Reagan and Obama. I mean, for some reason or other, they managed to find enough similarity in things that they've said to say, oh, he's actually quite a Reaganite in his own funny way. He's not a Muslim socialist that we thought he was.
No. Well, there were plenty who, of course, still think he was. I mean, he does seem amazingly relaxed. I don't know whether you saw that interview with Jay Leno. He was having the time of his life. I don't know whether I don't know where he gets it from, but he doesn't look like a man whose head is right on the block.
No.
Making jokes about playing soccer with...
He's pretty good at being cool, isn't he?
Yeah, he's very good at being cool, which probably really up... Whether being a cool black man as opposed to an angry black man is better, I'm not sure.
Much better.
You know.
Much better.
Eleanor,
same with the angry black woman thing too.
You've obviously been covering all day Hurricane Sandy superstorm, which has been absolutely devastating in the states that it's hit. What's your sense of how this might affect things in the coming days and next week?
Well, it'll affect things in two potential ways. One is it may affect the turnout, and that's of course critical in America. That's the big thing, and that's always the big thing for if it's bad weather. It's always the Democrats' vote that really doesn't get out to vote, because let's face it, the Republicans are the rich ones with the cars, and the Democrats are getting there by public transport. And if the weather's bad, and you children's school is shut, it's the voting day is on a Tuesday. I mean, how effective is that? So the big thing for the Democrats is getting the vote out there. But the thing that the Democrats would have going for them is that their man's in the White House. He can look presidential, assuming that 13 people have died already. 13 people have died in America because of the storm. That's pretty severe. New York is... How recently were you in New York, George? Did you say you were just there not long ago?
No. No, it wasn't.
New York is underwater. So's, Atlantic City.
Well, they're saying 60 million people will be affected one way or another.
Yeah, and that's covering... I mean, we were speaking to correspondents who had no light. No, they didn't know what was going on except for what they could see, because there's no television, there's nothing. Water's inundating, there's fires. It just sounds extraordinary. So it doesn't. I don't think it's a Katrina level catastrophe, because it's. I think the emergency services have handled it reasonably well. But,
although that's where the comparison surely will be, isn't it? That if Obama just sort of turns up and looks interested, he's going to be ahead of the game.
Well, I think that's... He immediately went... they both called off campaigning for a few days, and he immediately went back to the White House and directed, the services and all that sort of thing. So, look, in terms of the politics of it, yes, he may get a bit of a sort of bounce out of that. I think it's going to be really interesting to see the size of this storm. As George just said, 50 to 60 million people. This storm is massive. So it's hitting all up the East Coast. Now, I think it's even going to affect Ohio. This is the critical state, I think we'd all agree. And Obama had Ohio just before the first debate, and the problem is that the polls have been tracking down for him. And interestingly, you were talking about Romney as a Mormon. I think the evangelists who helped Bush over the line in Ohio in 2000 are out trying to rustle up the vote there for the Republicans. So, you know, the turnout in Ohio could be really critical. So if the weather continues, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, deathly weather that we've seen at the moment. It could just be miserable so that you don't want to go out. And if people are not terribly enthused about why should we put Obama back, then maybe they won't get out to vote. And that could turn it. Getting them out to the vote has become almost as important as voting. I mean, what last time they got over 50%, didn't they? They got 61%. Wow. Well done. Democracy in action, you know.
They do amazing things. I mean, they phone. They've got these lists of all these volunteers phoning all night saying, if you've got to vote, can we send a car for you? And it's every single vote. My partner's sister lives in Washington, and she's been sitting up bringing people all night for the last month of her life. But don't you love the old sub-editors in newspapers? This is a esteemed publication, the Sydney Daily Telegraph. That one headline says, presidential hopes just blown in the wind. That's pursed up. Let's get out the old book and of cliches and off you go. That was when Sandy arrived. Perfect storms, nature and politics. And there's a picture of a guy here. I'll have to explain it to you. He's a bloke from Delaware who's just boarded up the windows of his store. He's taken off his ladder. He's just boarded it up and he's got out the old spray can, and it says, "We will beat Obama and Sandy." Fantastic.
Yeah. I'm going to throw it open to the audience very shortly, so start thinking of your questions. Before I do that, I'd like to ask each of you, without holding you to anything or even reminding you if you're wrong, who you think will win. Starting with you, George.
Oh, right. Not the American people. That's called avoiding the question. I think Obama will win. I'm not absolutely sure why, because that's what I started by saying. I'm not sure why what's happening in America is happening. It's very strange that they should be even considering somebody who appears so inappropriate as Romney. And Obama is a first-termer, and he said, I can't do anything in the first term sort of thing, when he realised he couldn't, and therefore he might do much more in the second. But I'm not sure that Americans know what it is that they want Obama to do, and I'm not sure that they even know what Romney will save them from happening to them. This whole middle class thing has blurred the lines. It's no longer clear who votes for who and what. There's no red and blue anymore in American politics. There was never really any left and right, but there's no red and blue even. And I saw a piece the other day talked about it may have been that Rolling Stone piece, that Romney is unfortunately the future of not the United States of America if he gets elected, but the world. That he typifies the post-GFC world, as it were, in that he knew the GFC was going to be like before it even happened. I said he probably invented it in a way through the private equity antics of he and his mates, and then became his mates in Wall Street. I think this person was suggesting very gloomily that we'll be living in a Western world at least. Forget that other mob, they don't seem to count for anything. We'll be living in a Western world where people won't actually be doing much, they'll be doing deals. When it comes to business, they won't be making products, they won't be providing services, they won't be doing anything except doing deals. It will become a deal-making world, because that's the only thing that Romney knows about. And if he is the leader of the Western, so-called free Western world, then the rest of the world will follow. And it'll all become official, that you can be totally self-interested, which I think is what they're trying to say, that it's all about that. And having said that, maybe I don't know that Obama will win. I hope Obama will win.
Eleanor.
Okay, so it's a week to go. I think Obama will win. I think Obama will win on a far less emotional terms, though, than you, George. I think Obama will win simply because he only really needs to win those key states. He's still ahead in those key states. As long as he grabs the whole state, he gets the Electoral College votes and he's over the line. I think he will still hold on to Ohio because he's put enough money into the car industry there. I don't think that Romney has... I don't think he's got the capacity to win those people over. I think if they had a more charismatic candidate, the Republicans would certainly have a chance, even in places like Ohio, because I think you can't sit in one state and look at the unemployment rate going high, even though your job's safe. I still think that sort of flows through to how you vote. Having said that, I think the numbers that come out this Friday, just before the election, will be the job numbers, and if they go back up again, I think that's curtains for Obama. I think that could be a real problem. The other thing that we haven't talked about much tonight that I think also it's very hard to measure and you really don't know what's going on there. And again, it will come down to those small states where the Electoral College votes count. I think it's the money that is being poured into this campaign unofficially from the super PACs because of that Supreme Court decision. And I think that... You know, there's some very clever targeting going on of the right voters who are going to turn out, and if we switch them this way and we tell them that Obama's doing this on abortion and then Romney's doing this on abortion, you know, I think there are certain people that they will get out, they'll mobilise, and that can tip the vote in the state one way. I mean, that's the really interesting thing about American politics. It's winner takes all in these states, and, you know, as long as you tip it just the right way, you get the White House.
What's he mean to win?
Don't give me the numbers. It's something like 270.
270. Well, somebody rang me today and I wouldn't have a clue. Actually, I'll tell you who it was. It was Barry Cassidy.
He's a good numbers man, our Barry.
Barry said that Obama will get 290.
Oh,
so
well,
I don't know who's going to win, but Barry Cassidy says Obama's going to win.
Well, that's, you know, it makes it all the harder to say that I think Romney's going to. Actually. But, I didn't think Bush could win in 2004 or 2000, and Bush won in 2004 because of, you know, the last 3 or 4 days of getting the evangelical vote out. You know, it's a guess, and it might be trying to cover oneself against, you know, despair and misery to sort of prepare yourself
join
for
in
it.
and jump in early.
Well, you know, sort of think, oh well, he'll probably win the vote. But the numbers, the states, are exactly as they were in June. That's the funny thing. All that's happened is it's narrowed. It's still Colorado, Virginia, Ohio. Obama's got to win, and he's still ahead there. But instead of being 5 points ahead, he's 2.1 something, which is, and there's a 3% margin of error, so, you know, he's nowhere. But I have a feeling that for the reasons you outline, you know, the immense amount of money that the Republicans have this time, Obama had more money than McCain last time. He's got less this time than...
A lot less.
A lot less. And the consequences are pretty horrible for America's role in the world, really, when you think of a couple more Supreme Court heavyweight conservatives getting in there, goodbye to Roe v. Wade, goodbye to a whole lot of stuff, Iran, American foreign policy back to Bushism. It's horrendous, really, I think. Even allowing for the fact that these characters generally don't turn out to be worse than you think, although George W. did, really. He lived up to at least every expectation. And
the only bloke could make his father look bright.
Exactly. It made him look like a true Brahmin, you know, a distinguished man. But
and a legacy for Obama, too, that sort of goes from being the greatest sort of hope of the generation to being Jimmy Carter.
I think that's the... and as Jimmy Carter has desperately tried to avoid being, you know, by not saying we face a crisis, which in fact they do, because, you know, Carter was laughed at forever for saying we have a crisis here. And Reagan countered that with the profound "It's morning in America." So no one's game to say it's anything other than morning in America. So, I mean, I think that's almost as bad, that it's such a terrible legacy for Obama to be a one-term president.
Who would like to ask a question? Just put your hand up and a microphone will be placed in it.
Thank you. Given that another great power in the world is about to have a leadership reshuffle, China obviously, and given that many economic and political changes have taken place since Obama became president, can you talk about perhaps the effect of that and state-to-state economic and environmental relationships that could be born out of greater engagement? And of course, us being on that side of the world, any sort of engagement with us as well.
Who'd like to go for that one? Don?
Well, only without knowing very much about foreign policy at all. I mean, I do know about what the Americans, including the ones whose votes are going to count. 4 years ago, if you asked them about China, it was, the great devil, and that was about as much as was known. That's the thing, you see. You get the feeling that, I mean, it's not to say that a Romney team wouldn't be expertly advised about China and Asia in general or the world in general. It's rather that if their base now simply views China as the enemy, something to hate. It's taken their jobs and has no understanding of the role that China plays in keeping America afloat. They just don't. So, it's the way. If you want to feel like we're a really well-informed country, tour just west of the Appalachians, and you'll feel like a genius every day. And I don't. It's not unconnected with the amount of corn syrup either, I don't think. But there is a sort of. That's the worry. The worry about a Romney thing is that if it plays to the dreadful provincialism, which is the flip side of American exceptionalism. As long as you go on saying we're the greatest country in the world, we're the greatest country in the world, we're still the greatest country in the world, you're much less inclined to look at emerging powers and shifts in the balance of power. And I don't know. I mean, no doubt. I mean, it's so far ahead militarily that maybe that is all you need to have. But there is something hollow at the centre, and it doesn't feel healthy. If the country at large has such a very, very thin grasp on the reality of the rest of the world.
You think they still realise all the Tea Party people and most Republicans and probably a lot of the Democrats that the Chinese are still evil communists? I mean, do you think it occurs to them that they still are the old enemy? They're not just a trading enemy. They're not just taking all their jobs, that they actually have a different ideology altogether, still, officially, supposedly?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that they've ever... I mean, so long as they think Europe's a communist place and their definition of socialism is pretty amazing. I mean, this is the sort of worry, that a whole, in the kind of grand narrative, a whole strand of American history has been lost. Everything from FDR on has been lost. I mean, you can't... If Mark Twain walked into the Republican Party now and wanted to join up, he'd be thrown out. So would Will Rogers. The most popular Americans of all time would not be welcome, because it's shifted so far to the right and to this sort of... you couldn't possibly have justified the inequality in America 25 years ago. The top marginal tax rate with Eisenhower was 93%. Average was about 70%. Now Mitt Romney pays 14%, and that's okay. Poor people are going to vote for him. The inequality is fantastic. 93% of the I think it's what I read this afternoon. 93% of the recovery has basically gone to 1% of the population. That's okay. America really wasn't like that in 25 years ago. It's a phenomenal change towards the really an ideology which is being worked up by the hedge funds in league with the poor Tea Partiers.
Eleanor.
I was just going to make a brief comment on the China point. I think I'm more of an optimist than you, John. I think you're right on the two parties have completely diametrically opposed foreign policies on China. Here's Obama making his pivot to Asia. On the surface, that's great for Australia. Admittedly, he's pulling back a lot of the defence money, but the focus is still in our region. And here's Romney saying the first act that I'm going to, perform as president is to call China a currency fraudster. But I can't really quite bring myself to imagine that that the Tea Party really can be running foreign policy. I still think that there are enough sensible Americans there in the administration and in the Congress to actually pull them back. So that I think while on the surface the two parties appear quite far apart, I think once it comes down to acting, the rhetoric won't match the practice.
We probably thought the same thing about before they started to run the economy. We probably thought the same thing about them.
Well, on the economy, their policies are miles apart, and Romney hasn't managed to actually capitalise on that.
Maybe they think that where the Chinese are concerned, they're now Capcoms, is their official description. A communist body with a capitalist head, or a capitalist body with a communist head, depending on what you call that strange Chinese animal. And there may be the people on the right in America now think the Chinese are so busy turning themselves into 1.3 million middle-class people that they won't be bothered attacking America or doing anything horrible, so they won't have to worry about it. And they're possibly right about that. I mean, the Chinese had a choice after Tiananmen Square of democracy or prosperity, and they picked prosperity. It's simple as that. So there they are busily. If you've been there recently, I've been to America recently to see what sort of strife the middle class are in there, but in China they are burgeoning. I mean, it is a burgeoning middle class as distinct from America's, which is shrinking and frightened.
I mean, they have in their vice president, after 2008 and the GFC, you would have thought that another devotee of Ayn Rand would not be the first one they'd go for vice president, but they have.
It's really quite extraordinary, isn't it? In fact, when he was picked, James Fallows was on my program, and I asked him, what are the Democrats going to be making of this? And he said, they can barely contain their glee. They actually don't know whether this is a sort of joke. They keep looking over their shoulder to say, is there something we're missing? Is this not real? But of course, they haven't really made the most of Paul Ryan being there. And on the other hand, neither of the Republicans pushed him out in front a lot or pushed his economic ideas. So we haven't had that sort of contest of economic ideas that people said would emerge from, Romney picking Paul Ryan as his running mate. It's funny. This is a very funny election campaign. It really has been, hasn't it?
There's a great description in George Orwell's Homage to Catalonia about being in the trenches with the fascists opposite and not firing at each other, but a contest of megaphones, shouting slowly. They would shout all night and all day long, and they'd take turns. You'd be on duty for shouting through the megaphone, fascist, and they'd come back, communist, foreigner, get out, And then he said, he'd break the monotony by saying, we've got buttered toast if you want a dessert, and that sort of stuff.
But foreign policy is a... I mean, look at the situation we're in with foreign policy. I mean, Julia acknowledged the fact that it's not exactly her strong suit. And the other bloke thinks it's going to bed with troops in Afghanistan as foreign policy. But it's not high on anybody's agenda really these days. It's like we'd rather not know about it. Thank you very much. I wouldn't have a clue what Romney thinks about the Israeli-Palestinian situation. Anybody know?
Yes, he did go there.
He'd go there and do what?
And he made a bit of a fool of himself.
Who would he pray to over there?
He's mates with Netanyahu.
That'd be a bit of a problem. Hey.
He actually is close friends with Netanyahu. So
it didn't go too well for him, but everybody's forgotten, which is interesting in itself.
He went fundraising in Israel.
He did.
He ran big fundraisers.
It usually goes the other way.
That's right.
Hi, good evening. I don't think anybody would accuse rich liberals who vote for Obama as ignorant and not voting in their own economic interests. So why does the argument stand up that conservatives of the middle class who vote for Romney are ignorant in not voting for their own economic interests? Aren't they doing the same thing, which is just maybe voting on something completely different on a rational basis, which is somebody that shares their values and their vision for the future?
You talking about Romney sharing their values? The middle class?
Yeah.
I doubt that's the case.
Well, clearly many, many millions of Americans do share his values, as much as that might shock you, George.
But his are not middle class values. I'm saying that their values are middle class values, and we're saying that he gets closest to their values than some screaming lefty from the Democrats.
Americans have a funny definition of middle class. I mean, it's they don't never use the term working class anymore. That's gone completely. And middle class is really anybody, I guess, who's, you know, it's an aspirational term up to a point, but I guess it's somebody who's relatively comfortable, who's not in Barbara Ehrenreich territory. But I think the people that I was talking about really are Tea Party people who are not by and large middle class people, but what we would call working class people, and who have, in general, not done well at all, often generationally speaking, but have adopted a ferociously conservative view of the world. Conservative is putting it politely. Have a general feeling of grievance, I guess, and there may be all sorts of other things going on there. But no, I mean, there are. No one would argue that there aren't plenty of middle-class Americans who vote Republican, and good on them. I mean, I think if I was a middle-class American until 20 years ago, I would have voted Republican too. I've actually, you know, I think the best president since the Second World War is Eisenhower. In fact, I'm sure of it. I'd feel much safer with a world run by Eisenhower than one run by JFK or his brother.
Or Clinton.
Or Clinton. But what's that got to do with anything? Nothing really. But, but I think the Republican Party has lost, you know, what it used to be. You know, I think it's become, you know, and I think lots of middle-class Americans feel that way. A lot of ex-Republicans feel that way. That it's fallen into dangerous hands.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point. I think there's no reason why people should vote with their hip pocket. I think what we're pointing out is the Tea Party is an irrational fringe, or as our Treasurer called them, what did he call them?
Wackos.
Some lovely term. It was almost nut jobs, I think, but they really are very irrational, and they are playing on people's fears. And I think there are, you know, when you see what they're doing, there's a sort of, you know, how can you do that to vulnerable people? You know, you can see what's going on. On the other hand, I think also, you know, you're right, in an American context in particular, people tend not only to vote on economic issues, they vote on religious issues, they vote on moral issues, and probably much more than we do here in Australia. Certainly more than we do overtly anyway. It's a much more talked about. And
it's also that strange part of the world, political world, where you can be a registered Republican and vote the other way if you feel like it, or you can register for both and turn up at both sets of meetings. And
you could do that in Australia.
Presumably, though,
we don't
of course,
register to vote for a party.
No, but you could be a member of the Labor Party and vote for whoever you like.
I'm sure there's probably quite a few of them about to do it, Eleanor. I think, though, that it's also in America, if you do go out and vote, presumably there is something felt in it. You know, you don't have to get up and do it. And that's a big difference. It's
a bit, being a Republican or a Democrat in America is a bit like barracking for Collingwood or Carlton. You know, it's a part of an identity for people. I mean, I'm jesting. It's not that simple, but I mean that people just need a label. It's much easier, you know, whether it's a disease or a political ideology, if it's got a label. And what are you? I'm a Republican from Idaho. You know, that's a good start. I'm a Presbyterian Republican from Idaho, with 3 kids, right? We're getting closer to having an identity. But here in Australia, I can't imagine if people, what are you? I vote for Collingwood and I work in a bank. But they would never say I vote barrack for Collingwood, work in a bank and vote Labor. They'd never say that in this country. Oh, no. That's just between me and the ballot box.
I've never heard it, yeah. We have to wrap it up. I can't believe it's gone so fast, but there is another event in here at 7:30, so we're going to have to say goodnight and thank you very, very much. The count, of course, Australia time will be next Wednesday, and I don't know about you, but I am taking the day off. I'll be sitting down in front of the TV with a Campari and orange and about 10 o'clock in the morning, and I'll be glued, so not a good time to call. Please thank George Negus, Eleanor Hall and Don Watson for such a great conversation.